My name is Tom Larson, and what I'm about to share with you is not for the faint of heart. It's a tale of horror, of madness, and of a relentless descent into darkness that began with something as simple as a missing finger. It all started one seemingly ordinary morning. I woke up in my small apartment in downtown Seattle, stretching and yawning as I tried to shake off the remnants of sleep. As my hand grazed my face, I felt a sharp pang of pain. Gradually, I looked down and saw that my pinky finger was missing, completely gone, as if it had never been there. Blood oozed from the clean stump where my finger should have been. Panic set in instantly. I scrambled out of bed, my heart racing, and rushed to the bathroom. There was no blood on the sheets, no sign of a struggle, nothing to indicate what had happened. How could this be? I stared at my hand in the mirror, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just a cut, the entire finger was missing, and the wound looked as though it had been professionally cauterized. I called 911, but my explanation sounded insane even to my own ears. They sent an ambulance, and I was taken to the hospital. The doctors were baffled. They performed all sorts of tests, but they couldn't determine how I had lost my finger or who could have done it. I was sent home with a prescription for painkillers and a referral to a psychiatrist. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing with fear and confusion. When I did manage to drift off, my dreams were filled with shadows and whispers, an ever-present sense of dread. I woke up the next morning drenched in sweat, and the nightmare continued in the waking world. My ring finger was now gone, the same clean, cauterized wound. I screamed in horror, my voice echoing through the empty apartment. Over the next few weeks, it happened every single night. Each morning I would wake up to find another finger missing. I sought help from doctors, but they had no answers. The psychiatrist suggested it might be some sort of extreme self-harm or sleepwalking disorder, but I knew I wasn't doing this to myself. I set up cameras around my bedroom, hoping to catch whatever was happening on tape, but the footage showed nothing. I would simply be there one moment, then the next moment a finger would be missing. I became obsessed with finding out what was happening to me. My work suffered, my relationships deteriorated. I isolated myself, spending hours researching anything that could explain my situation: occult practices, rare medical conditions, supernatural phenomena. Nothing seemed to fit. As the fingers on my left hand vanished, then those on my right, I fell into a deep depression. The pain was excruciating, both physically and mentally. I began to question my sanity. Was I truly losing my mind? One night, as I sat in the darkened living room, clutching the remaining stumps of my fingers, I heard a faint whispering sound. It was coming from my bedroom. Gathering what little courage I had left, I crept down the hallway and slowly opened the door. The whispering grew louder, a cacophony of voices all speaking in hushed tones. I saw nothing unusual, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I started sleeping with the lights on, but it made no difference. Each night, another finger disappeared, and soon my toes followed. My hands and feet were becoming grotesque, mangled stumps. Desperation consumed me. I became a prisoner in my own home, too terrified to sleep but too exhausted to stay awake. One night, I resolved to stay up until I found out what was happening. I downed cups of coffee, swallowed caffeine pills, and paced the floor, my eyes darting to every shadow. Around 3 a.m. I felt a sudden, overwhelming drowsiness. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't fight it. My eyelids grew heavy, and I collapsed onto the couch. I woke up to the most excruciating pain I'd ever felt. My feet, my toes were gone. I screamed, the agony overwhelming every other sense. Blood pooled around the stumps of my feet. The pain was so intense that I blacked out. When I came to, I was in the hospital. They had managed to stop the bleeding and had sedated me heavily. The doctors were bewildered. They kept me for observation, but even under constant surveillance, another toe went missing. It was then that I was transferred to a psychiatric facility. My time there was a blur of medication, therapy sessions, and endless questions. The doctors tried to assure me that I was safe, but I knew better. Each morning, despite the heavy sedation and locked doors, another digit was gone. They couldn't keep me there forever, and eventually, they had no choice but to release me. The case was deemed a psychological anomaly, something beyond their understanding. Back in my apartment, the pattern continued. My life became a waking nightmare. I took to wandering the streets at night, hoping to escape whatever malevolent force was targeting me. But no matter where I went, I would wake up to find another piece of me missing. I began to notice changes in my reflection. At first, it was subtle, a fleeting shadow, a faint outline. But as my condition worsened, the reflection became more distinct. It was a figure standing just behind me, featureless and dark, watching me with an intensity that chilled my soul. I turned to the only option I had left. I sought out a reclusive occult expert, a man named Marcus Gray. He lived in a ramshackle house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by talismans and protective charms. When I told him my story, he listened without interruption, his face growing grimmer with each word. "There are entities that feed on human suffering," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They exist in the shadows, preying on the vulnerable. You've been marked by one of these entities." "Why? Why me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Once marked, it's almost impossible to escape. It feeds on your fear, your pain. The more you struggle, the stronger it becomes." Desperation clawed at me. "Is there any way to stop it?" Marcus sighed heavily. "There's a ritual, an ancient one. It might sever the connection, but it's incredibly dangerous. If it fails, the entity will consume you entirely." I had no choice. The ritual was my last hope. Marcus explained the process: a series of incantations, symbols drawn in blood, and an offering of personal items. It had to be performed at the witching hour, under the light of a waning moon. The night of the ritual, I gathered everything Marcus had instructed me to bring. He prepared the space, drawing intricate symbols on the floor and lighting black candles. The air was thick, people with tension, and the shadows seemed to dance with anticipation. Marcus began chanting in a language I didn't understand, his voice resonating with power. He motioned for me to step into the center of the symbols. As I did, a wave of nausea hit me, and the room spun violently. The shadows grew darker, enveloping us. Suddenly, a piercing cold filled the room, and the entity revealed itself. It was a mass of darkness, shifting and writhing with malevolent intent. I could feel its hunger, its desire to consume me. Marcus continued the incantations, his voice growing louder, more urgent. The entity shrieked, a sound that cut through my very soul. The pain was unbearable, as if every cell in my body was being torn apart. The candles flickered, and the symbols on the floor glowed with an eerie light. The entity surged towards me, and I screamed in terror. Marcus shouted the final words of the ritual, and a blinding light filled the room. When I came to, the entity was gone. The room was silent, the air heavy with the aftermath of the struggle. Marcus lay on the floor, unconscious but alive. I checked my hands and feet. Nothing had changed. My fingers and toes were still missing, but the pain had subsided. Marcus stirred, his face pale and drawn. "It's over," he said weakly. "The connection is severed." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The damage had been done. My body was permanently scarred, and the psychological trauma would never fully heal. I moved away from Seattle, trying to start over in a place where the memories wouldn't haunt me. But the scars remain, a constant reminder of the nightmare I endured. Every now and then, I catch a glimpse of a shadow out of the corner of my eye, and my heart skips a beat. The fear never truly goes away, and in the dark of night, I can still hear the faint whispering, a chilling reminder that some horrors can never be fully escaped.